Fire like this only means one thing. You're in my kitchen now. Welcome to Season 1.
Welcome to the Animator's Couch.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we've pulled together a really fascinating narrative. It's an excerpt detailing a complete personal and professional reinvention.
It really is.
The story is titled New York Calling, Huntley's Reawakening, and it's basically a roadmap for anyone who's ever had to, rebuild their life from the ground up.
It's a remarkable piece of source material. It documents not just the physical journey, New York to Florida and then back again, but the huge emotional and career pivots that force these kinds of life shifts.
Right.
So our mission isn't just to summarize what happened to Huntley. We want to really unpack the specific catalyst, both the good and the destructive one.
The things that drove him.
Exactly. The things that drove him to success, then into this total collapse, and finally to that conscious, very difficult decision to come home.
And what's so interesting is how the source frames it right from the start. It tells us up front, Huntley never planned on leaving New York. He was pulled away. It wasn't his own ambition driving the move. And that, I think, raises a huge question right away. When we build a new life based on something external, like a relationship, how stable is that foundation?
That framing is just crucial. It sets up the whole theme. That first move was reactive.
Yeah.
A choice made from the heart.
Yeah.
The return trip, as we're about to see, had to be something completely different. It had to be proactive.
Okay, let's unpack this starting line. The first major pivot point is pinpointed exactly. 2013. He meets a woman from Philly, and she basically becomes the accidental architect of his entire future career.
She was the spark. The source makes a point to say she didn't just love him, she saw this untapped potential in him.
His work ethic, charm, talent.
Right. And this dynamic is so powerful. She believed in his cooking talent before he even had the confidence to call himself a chef.
That's a huge detail.
It is, because it means his initial professional identity was born from and really nurtured by someone else's belief in him. External validation.
And when she moves south to Florida, he doesn't even hesitate. He just packs his bags and follows. It was a rapid, all-in decision.
Total leap of faith.
He leaves his entire home context behind for a life built on this one connection. I mean, it speaks to a certain kind of fearless impulsivity, doesn't it? To just dismantle your life for the promise of another one.
It does, and Florida was the perfect psychological space for that kind of reinvention. The source calls it a reset.
Son, a different pace.
A whole new energy. In New York, he was the person he used to be. But in Florida, he could be anyone. It was a blank canvas.
And he definitely didn't waste that opportunity. Down there, he becomes what he's now known for. A trained, respected personal chef. This wasn't a slow build either. He went from, an amateur in a kitchen to a successful business owner pretty quickly.
The specifics of that success are really important because they define the height from which he's about to fall. He wasn't just cooking meals, he built a high-end business.
We're talking private dinners, high net worth clients.
Luxury parties, exactly. His food was described as an experience. So he leveraged that whole reset environment to define himself professionally and financially at a very, very high level.
So he finds the professional success in Florida that New York never gave him, all because he followed a relationship. It seems like his entire empire was built on, metaphorical sand.
That's the core vulnerability right there, isn't it? He achieved this peak professional identity, the successful chef. But that identity was tied completely to the reason he moved.
He didn't move for the job.
No, he moved for her. So if your success is rooted in these external drivers, instead of, say, a deep internal passion for the place itself, that success can feel hollow, or even worse, it becomes collateral damage when that driver disappears.
Which brings us to the next pivot, the inevitable one. We've established the peak of his success. Now we have to talk about the failure that all that achievement couldn't protect him from.
Yeah, the success was very public, but his personal life was just quietly collapsing. The source maps it out with this really painful detail.
Little disagreements turned into distance.
Distance turned into silence, and eventually silence turned into the end. It wasn't some dramatic explosion. It was a slow, agonizing erosion, and that leaves really deep scars.
And Huntley's reaction to this implosion, this is where you see the true cost of using a relationship as your main career catalyst. When they split, his reaction is so decisive, it's almost ruthlessly self-destructive.
It is.
He moves out, and this is the critical part. He sells his thriving business. He just walks away from the whole chapter he thought would be his future.
That decision to sell a profitable high-end business is just staggering. It's more than a breakup. It's a total existential rejection of his entire Florida life.
Why do that? Why liquidate your whole professional identity?
Because the pain was so profound, he needed to just eradicate the entire environment that held that pain. The business was too tangled up with the relationship.
He couldn't have one without being reminded of the other.
Exactly. It's a form of high-stakes, pain-driven self-sabotage. He made sure there's absolutely no safety net left.
If he'd just moved apartments but kept the business, he would have had some stability, an anchor. But by selling it, he deliberately puts himself into this state of limbo.
He jettisoned the successful chef identity he'd spent years building, all in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
And that decisiveness pushed him right into what the source calls the drift. He wasn't chasing anything anymore, he was just escaping. He gets a small apartment near the beach because, in his own words, he didn't know what else to do.
Think about that contradiction. This is a guy who proved he could build a business from nothing, and suddenly, he's just incapable of making a plan.
He's geographically in the place of his greatest success, but he's psychologically completely adrift. He just walks the shoreline for days.
And the source notes that painful contrast. He was a successful chef with no kitchen, no plan, and no idea what the next move should be.
His professional identity was just totally severed from his emotional reality. It just highlights the huge psychological cost of relying too much on those external drivers.
The successful chef was built on her belief in him and the energy of a new place.
And when those drivers failed, the whole identity collapsed, leaving him with all the technical skill in the world, but zero internal direction. He's just staring at the ocean, paralyzed.
That state of paralysis is finally broken, not by some internal spark, but by an external lifeline. His phone rings. It's his mother.
This is the moment. This is the narrative's pivot point. It's the jolt he needed to break out of that drift. He thinks it's just a normal check-in, but he hears something heavier in her voice.
That detail really sets the stakes, doesn't it? She's sensing his collapse from hundreds of miles away.
Oh, absolutely. And her plea is so powerful. It's not a suggestion, like, hey, you should come visit.
No, it's a statement of necessity. Baby, I want you to come home.
And then the line that just cuts through everything, I need you home. It's time. It was the authority in her voice, driven by need.
It's like Huntley was running on empty, unable to make a plan for himself.
And his mother provides one. A simple, undeniable, pre-made plan that just bypasses all his emotional paralysis. She shifts the whole motivation away from personal escape, which just leads to drifting, and toward familial obligation. And necessity, well, it forces you to act.
His hesitation, though, it shows just how stuck he really was. He's staring at this ocean he still didn't feel connected to. Going back wasn't in the plan because he didn't have a plan.
Exactly. Going back must have felt like admitting total defeat.
But his mother gave him permission to see it differently. It wasn't a retreat. It was answering a call, a duty.
Right.
It reframed the whole thing.
And this man, who was so decisive in selling a business and moving out, couldn't make this next move for himself until someone else's voice basically mandated it.
But once the decision is made, it's final. His simple, all right, Ma, I'll come home, is the sound of resignation turning into acceptance.
And the departure is just as clean as the initial break. A week later, he leaves. He packs what was left.
No business, no girlfriend. Just a man, a few bags, and a steering wheel.
That image is so potent. He stripped away everything, all the symbols of his successful but fractured identity. He's ensuring that the man who arrives in New York has nothing left but himself. It's the ultimate fresh start.
And that drive, the 24 hours from Florida back to New York, it becomes this final mandatory stage of reflection for him.
It has to be.
The source says it felt much longer, like every mile was peeling back a layer of him he had left behind.
It's a forced isolation, you know? There are no distractions, no work, no partner, no ocean to stare at. It's just him, the road, and the silence. He's wrestling with everything he'd been avoiding during his drift.
The pain, the pride from the success he threw away, the confusion.
And that tiny spark of hope from his mother's call. It all comes to a head right there in the driver's seat.
I think that long, grinding drive is essential for the insight he's about to have. And here's where it gets really interesting. Somewhere on that drive, he has this core realization that just shifts the entire narrative.
It's the realization that distinguishes this new chapter from his first one. He realizes he wasn't running away anymore.
Yes, that's the key.
The move away from Florida was driven by pain. but the movement toward New York was now being driven by purpose.
That distinction running from failure versus going back to rebuild, that is the single most important lesson in this whole story.
It is. The failure in Florida forced the move, but the internal framework, that had to be adjusted during those 24 hours on the road.
He chose to frame it not as retreating to safety, but as actively going back to build something new, something resilient.
It's the difference between just surviving and actually recovering. Recovery requires agency. He realizes he's not going back to be the guy he was when he left, or even the successful chef from Florida.
He's going back to define a third version of himself.
A version built on his own internal choice, not on external circumstances.
And that new internal framework changes everything when he finally arrives. When that familiar skyline appears, the source says New York looked different. Not because the city changed, but because he had.
He arrives having reconciled the pain of the past with the necessity of the future. And the transformation is complete when he steps out of the car. He breathes in that cold air, and for the first time in a long, long time, he feels awake.
It's such a visceral, physical feeling. It's the proof of the internal shift that he made on the road.
Right.
And the narrative confirms this is the beginning of the version of Huntley the world was about to meet. The man who returns is fortified by failure and driven by a genuine internal commitment, not just the promise of a relationship.
So what does this all mean? Huntley's journey, it's this profound exploration of personal accountability and growth. He left New York because of love, built a success based on external validation.
And when that validation crumbled, he just rejected his entire identity to escape the pain.
But he was only able to move forward once his mother gave him that sense of necessity. And then, crucially, he was the one who had to translate that into an internal choice to rebuild rather than just run home.
It really teaches us that, technical skill and ambition aren't enough. Stability requires an internal foundation that can handle external chaos. The success he found in Florida was contingent. The success he's now seeking in New York, this new version of him, it's based entirely on his own conscious decision to actively build his future. That shift from being a passive recipient of life to an active builder, that's the real reawakening.
And it raises an important question for you, for the listener, about the timing of transformation. Huntley only felt awake once he physically got back to New York, after he'd already made that decision to rebuild on the drive. So do we sometimes need that physical symbol of home or our roots to really cement a huge internal realization?
Or could he have found that same feeling while staring at the ocean in Florida if he had just chosen to stay and find a new kitchen there?
What is the relationship between our internal state and the geography we inhabit? It's something to consider as you navigate your own professional and personal resets.
We'll catch you next time for the next deep dive.